He mocked her accent during the meeting, until the waitress delivered a perfect Japanese translation. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. The boardroom was filled with tension as Jack Anderson, a sharp, ambitious CEO, sat at the head of the table. With his perfect suit and a watch that cost more than most people's yearly salary, he was used to calling the shots. The meeting was intense, with projections for the company's next major acquisition being discussed. His voice, commanding yet casual, echoed through the room as he grilled his team on the finer points of the deal. Among the team was Maria, a quiet and humble waitress who had been brought in to serve the lunch during the meeting. She had only recently moved to New York from Tokyo, and with her thick Japanese accent, she was still getting used to the fast-paced corporate environment. As she made her rounds, filling water glasses and delivering sandwiches, Jack couldn't resist a small, mocking comment. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I could barely understand your accent," he said with a smirk, his voice dripping with condescension. The room fell silent for a moment, but Maria remained calm. She merely nodded, her expression unreadable. Most of the others in the room chuckled at Jack's remark, but Maria simply continued her work without a word, focusing on what she was doing rather than responding to the insult. However, as the meeting progressed, something happened that no one expected. Jack leaned back in his chair, still somewhat amused by the earlier comment. The discussion shifted to a business proposal involving Japanese investors, and Jack, who was unfamiliar with the language, decided to make a joke. He addressed Maria. "I guess I could just ask you to help translate some of this, right? Maybe you know a little Japanese?" His words were a mockery, an attempt to continue his subtle jabs at her. But instead of shrinking away, Maria looked directly at him, her calm gaze never wavering. "Actually, I do know Japanese," she replied, her voice steady. She took a deep breath and, without hesitation, began translating the proposal that Jack had just mocked. Her Japanese was flawless, her pronunciation perfect. Jack's smirk faltered as he listened, realizing that this woman, whom he had dismissed as a mere waitress, had just outperformed him in front of everyone in the room. The once laughing board members fell silent, watching in awe as Maria, with ease, navigated the intricacies of the business deal. Jack blinked, his previous arrogance evaporating as he understood that the joke was on him. The room was still, the only sound being the soft hum of the air conditioning and the faint tapping of Maria's hands as she wrote out the final translation. Jack was stunned, unable to speak for a few moments. He had thought her accent was something to be mocked, but in that instant, he saw her true value, something far beyond what he had assumed. As Maria finished, she looked up from her notes, meeting his eyes. "Is there anything else you would like me to help with, sir?" she asked politely, her voice professional once more. Jack sat in silence, processing what had just happened. For the first time in a long while, he felt humbled, a sensation he had not known since his rise to the top. He had underestimated her, and she had just proven that appearances and accents didn't define a person's worth. The tables had turned in the most unexpected of ways. The story wasn't over, but Jack knew one thing for sure. Maria had earned his respect, and he would never make the mistake of judging someone based on their accent again. I had expected this day to end like any other. Jack Anderson, once again, found himself in his office, surrounded by glass walls that looked out over Manhattan's sprawling skyline. But there was something different about today. It was a quiet realization that had crept up on him since the meeting, a sense of discomfort that he could not shake. His thoughts kept drifting back to Maria, the waitress he had mocked without thinking, and how, in just a few moments, she had managed to show him the value of things he had overlooked for so long. He knew the truth now. He had misjudged her completely. Jack sat behind his massive desk, still unable to fully process what had happened. He had grown used to being the center of attention, to people hanging on his every word, to commanding a room with nothing but his presence. But Maria had turned that world upside down, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for it. Maria had not just proven her knowledge of Japanese. She had done something far more important. She had humbled him. She had made him question his assumptions about people, his assumptions about power, and even his assumptions about himself. But now, in the quiet solitude of his office, Jack was facing a new challenge. He couldn't stop thinking about Maria. He couldn't stop thinking about her quiet confidence, her ability to stay composed while he had tried to put her down. He had never met anyone like her before, and he didn't know how to handle it. She was just a waitress, right? That's what he had told himself. But now he realized that she was so much more than that. What was it about her that made him feel so uncertain? Was it her intellect? Her calm demeanor? Or was it the way she had stood up to him without even trying? His phone buzzed on the desk, and Jack snapped out of his reverie. It was a text from his assistant, reminding him of his next meeting. But the text went unnoticed as Jack's mind wandered back to Maria. He had to see her again. He needed to understand her. He knew that his next steps were critical, but something inside him was pushing him toward a decision he wasn't sure he was ready to make. He couldn't leave things as they were. He had to make things right. He glanced at his watch and stood up, making a quick decision. He would find her. He would go back to the restaurant where it all started. There was something he had to tell her, something that had been left unsaid in the heat of the moment. He wasn't just going to let this go. The thought of seeing her again made his heart race, and he wasn't entirely sure why. Maybe it was the way she had made him feel seen, in a way that no one else had. Maybe it was the way she had stood up for herself in front of a room full of people who had underestimated her. Whatever it was, Jack knew he couldn't leave it unfinished. He took the elevator down to the lobby, his mind racing as he walked out onto the bustling streets of Manhattan. The cold wind hit him, but he barely noticed. His thoughts were too consumed by the idea of seeing Maria again. He arrived at the restaurant soon after, his mind still racing. As he entered, he saw her behind the counter, serving a table with grace and precision. She didn't even look up as he walked toward her, but he could tell she knew he was there. Jack stood by the counter for a moment, watching her work. She moved with an ease that suggested she had been doing this for years, her eyes scanning the room, making sure everything was running smoothly. When she finally noticed him standing there, she raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Anderson," she said, her voice as calm and composed as it had been in the meeting. "What can I do for you?" Jack took a deep breath, finally gathering the courage to speak. "Maria," he said softly, "I wanted to apologize. I was wrong to mock you earlier. I didn't mean it, and I realize now how inappropriate and disrespectful I was." Maria studied him for a moment, her eyes unreadable. She didn't respond immediately, and for a brief moment, Jack wondered if she would just walk away, dismissing him as unworthy of her time. But then, she nodded. "Apology accepted," she said simply. There was no bitterness in her voice, no anger, just calm acceptance. Jack couldn't help but feel a wave of relief wash over him. He had expected resistance, but instead, she had given him exactly what he needed, a chance to make things right. But he wasn't done yet. "I also want to offer you something," Jack continued, his voice more confident now. "I've been thinking about what you said, and I know I can't undo my mistake. But I'd like to offer you a position. I want you to work with me, in a more official capacity. You have skills that I need, and I'd be honored if you'd consider joining my team." Maria looked at him for a long time before responding. "I appreciate the offer," she said finally, "but I'm happy here. I don't need your money or your position. I'm content with my life as it is." Jack felt his heart drop. This wasn't how he had imagined this conversation going. He had expected her to jump at the opportunity, but instead, she had turned him down. "I understand," he said quietly, "but I'll leave the door open, just in case. If you change your mind, you know where to find me." Maria nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "I'll keep that in mind." As Jack turned to leave, he felt something shift within him. Maybe it was the realization that he had just experienced something completely unexpected. Or maybe it was the understanding that there was more to life than power and money. For the first time in a long time, Jack Anderson felt like he was walking away from something important. And yet, somehow, he was okay with it. "I am standing on the edge of something I did not expect," Jack thought to himself as he walked through the bustling streets of Manhattan. The city was as busy as ever, its constant energy clashing with the unsettling calm he felt inside. The encounter with Maria had left him in a state of reflection that he had not experienced in years. For the first time, he realized that money and power were not the only things that mattered in life. He had spent so many years building an empire, chasing success, But Maria had reminded him that there were other things, far more important things, that could shape a person. He had never thought much about people like Maria, the ones who worked behind the scenes, the ones who quietly made the world function. And yet, here he was, standing at the crossroads of his own life, uncertain of where to go next. After leaving the restaurant, Jack had spent the rest of the evening in his office, staring at the skyline, the words Maria had said replaying in his mind. She had rejected his offer to work with him, and while he had respected her decision, he could not shake the feeling that there was more to her than met the eye. The next day, Jack found himself walking back to the restaurant. It was a decision that had been building in him since the moment he left. He needed to see Maria again. He needed to understand her more. As he entered the familiar space of the restaurant, he spotted her immediately. She was carrying a tray, moving with her usual grace, serving customers with the same professional demeanor that he had first seen. But today, something about her seemed different. She wasn't just a waitress to him anymore. She had become someone he felt drawn to, someone he wanted to understand. He stood by the counter, waiting for her to notice him, but she didn't. She was too focused on her work. Jack felt the old familiar stir of impatience, but it was different now. It wasn't about control, it wasn't about power. It was about wanting to make a connection. After a few moments, she finally looked up, meeting his eyes with the same calm indifference she had shown the day before. "Mr. Anderson," she said, her tone polite but distant. "What can I do for you today?" Jack paused for a moment, gathering his thoughts. He had come here to apologize again, but now, standing in front of her, he realized he needed to do more. "Maria," he began, his voice soft but steady, "I've been thinking about our conversation. I need to be honest with you. I respect you, more than I've respected anyone in a long time." Maria raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. She simply stood there, waiting for him to continue. "I made a mistake," Jack admitted, "when I mocked you in that meeting. I thought I had power over you, but I was wrong. And now I realize I want to do more than just apologize. I want to understand you better." Maria looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face, trying to read him. She had heard his words, but there was something in the way he spoke that made her hesitate. "Why do you want to understand me?" she asked, her voice quiet but pointed. "Why do you think I matter?" Jack was caught off guard by her question. He had never thought about it that way. To him, Maria had always been just another face, another person working in the background. But now, he could see her clearly. He could see her strength, her confidence, the way she had stood up to him without fear. "Because you taught me something," he said after a pause. "You showed me that I've been living my life wrong. I've been so focused on building my empire, on chasing after things that don't really matter, that I lost sight of what really matters." Maria didn't respond right away. She simply stood there, watching him carefully. Jack knew this wasn't going to be easy. He wasn't used to being vulnerable, to opening up to someone else. But for some reason, he wanted to try with her. "I don't want to live my life just for the money, just for the power," Jack continued. "I want to make a real difference. And I think you could help me do that." Maria shook her head slowly. "I can't help you, Jack," she said softly. "I can't change your life for you. You have to do that yourself." Her words stung, but Jack didn't back down. "I know," he said quietly, "but I want to try. I want to be someone different, someone who isn't just defined by his wealth." Maria looked at him for a long time before speaking again. "You're not the first person to try and change," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But the question is, Jack, will you stick with it? Or will you go back to your old ways when it gets hard?" Jack's heart skipped a beat. He had heard the skepticism in her voice, the doubt. But it didn't discourage him. It only made him more determined. "I will stick with it," he said, his voice steady and full of conviction. "I'm ready to make that change. And I need your help to do it." Maria studied him one last time, her eyes searching for something in his expression. Finally, she nodded. "I'll help you," she said quietly, "but only if you're truly committed. If you think you can just flip a switch and become a different person, then this won't work." Jack felt a sense of relief wash over him. She had agreed to help him. It wasn't going to be easy, he knew that. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. "I'm committed," he said firmly. "I won't give up." And with that, Jack Anderson knew that his journey was just beginning. "I woke up the next morning with a sense of resolve that I hadn't felt in years." Jack Anderson stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie with hands that felt steady, but his mind was elsewhere. The events of the past few days had shifted something deep inside him. He had walked into Maria's life thinking he could offer her a chance, but now he realized it wasn't just about giving her something. It was about what he could learn from her. Today, something had changed within him, and he couldn't let it slip away. Maria had agreed to help him, but Jack knew it wasn't going to be easy. She was a person who valued substance, not empty promises. She had challenged him to prove himself, to show that he wasn't just a man of wealth and power, but someone capable of genuine change. He had always relied on his business acumen, his ability to negotiate and manipulate the systems around him. But now he was facing a challenge that had nothing to do with deals or numbers. It was about becoming a better man, someone who deserved to be respected, not just feared. The morning passed in a blur of meetings and phone calls, but Jack couldn't focus. Every time he tried to work, his mind kept drifting back to Maria. Her words echoed in his head. If you think you can just flip a switch and become a different person, then this won't work. Her skepticism was well-founded, and Jack knew he had to prove her wrong. At lunch, he made his decision. He was going to take the day off. This wasn't like him, but he needed to do this. He needed to find Maria again and make sure that he wasn't just saying the right things, but that he was ready to take action. He headed straight to the restaurant. The familiar hum of the city was there, but today, it seemed distant. As he approached the restaurant, Jack felt a nervous excitement, a feeling he wasn't used to. He had been the one in control, the one who called the shots. But today he was going into this with no expectations, just a desire to connect. He opened the door and was greeted by the warm, inviting atmosphere of the restaurant. It was bustling, but there she was. Maria. She was at the counter, her back to him as she took an order from a customer. He watched her for a moment before walking up to the counter. When she turned around and saw him standing there, she didn't look surprised. It was almost as if she had been expecting him. "Jack," she said, her voice steady as always. "I wasn't expecting to see you today. What brings you back?" Jack felt a small surge of gratitude. Maria had no illusions about him. She didn't try to make him feel like he was anything other than what he was. She didn't care about his title or his wealth. It was a rare thing, and Jack knew it was why he respected her so much. "I need to talk," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "About yesterday. About everything." Maria raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. She simply nodded, indicating that he should follow her. She led him to a quiet corner of the restaurant, away from the busy lunch rush. They sat down at a table, and for a moment, there was silence between them. Jack felt like he was about to open up in a way he never had before. He wasn't sure how to start, but he knew he couldn't waste this opportunity. "I've been thinking," he began, looking down at his hands for a moment. "I've spent my whole life trying to control everything around me. People, situations, deals. But I never stopped to think about who I was underneath all of that. Who I am when I'm not wearing a suit or managing a company." Maria didn't interrupt, but Jack could tell she was listening closely. Her calm demeanor made him feel like he could say whatever he needed to. "You told me that if I wanted to change, I had to stick with it. I think you're right. I can't just flip a switch and expect to be a different person. But I'm willing to try, and I want you to know that I'm serious." There was a long pause. Maria didn't say anything at first, just looked at him, weighing his words. Finally, she spoke. "I've heard that kind of promise before, Jack. People say they want to change, but when it gets hard, they go right back to their old ways. Why should I believe that you're different?" Her words stung, but Jack didn't back down. He had expected her to be skeptical. In fact, it was part of why he respected her. She didn't give in to easy words or empty promises. "Because I've never had someone challenge me like you did," Jack said, his voice steady. "I've always thought I could do anything with my wealth, my influence. But you showed me that there's more to life than that. And I don't want to live in that bubble anymore. I want to live a life that means something, not just one that's full of things." Maria studied him for a long moment, her eyes focused and sharp. She wasn't convinced, and Jack didn't expect her to be. But there was something in her gaze, something softer than before. "All right," she said finally. "I'll help you. But you're going to have to prove it, Jack. I'm not going to hold your hand through this. If you really want to change, you're going to have to do the hard work yourself." Jack nodded, feeling a sense of determination welling up inside him. This was the moment that would define everything. He wasn't going to let it slip away. "I'm ready," he said firmly. "I won't let you down." Maria smiled slightly, a hint of approval in her eyes. "We'll see," she said quietly. And with that, Jack knew that the road ahead would be difficult. But it was a road he was ready to walk, with Maria's guidance. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the path to something real. I woke up the next morning with a sense of determination that I hadn't felt in years. Jack Anderson had made a decision. He was going to prove himself, and he was going to do it with integrity. He had spent so many years building his empire on the backs of others, pushing people aside, thinking he was above it all. But now, after everything that had happened with Maria, he realized he had been missing something crucial. He had been so focused on power, control, and success that he had forgotten the real value in life: connection, respect, and honesty. Maria had shown him that, and now, it was his turn to change. The morning was quiet as Jack prepared for the day ahead. He knew that it was going to be a challenge. Maria had made it clear that words were easy, but actions were what mattered. He wasn't sure where to begin, but he knew he had to start with something. The first step was simple. He needed to stop relying on his wealth and influence to get what he wanted. The second step was harder. He needed to prove that he was more than just a businessman. He needed to be someone who truly cared about the people around him. It wasn't going to be easy. Maria had been right about one thing. Change wasn't a light switch that could be flipped on and off. It was a process, and it would take time. But Jack was determined to stick with it. He spent the morning working, trying to focus on the tasks at hand, but his mind kept drifting back to Maria. She had been the catalyst for his transformation, and now he couldn't stop thinking about how he could make things right. That afternoon, Jack made a decision. He was going to go back to the restaurant. He wasn't sure if Maria would even be there, but he had to try. He had to take responsibility for his actions and show her that he was serious about changing. As he entered the restaurant, he spotted her right away. Maria was behind the counter, as usual, serving customers with grace and confidence. There was a certain calmness about her, a quiet strength that Jack found impossible to ignore. She was different from anyone he had ever known, and that difference was exactly what had drawn him to her. He walked up to the counter, his heart beating a little faster than usual. She noticed him immediately, her expression neutral but expectant. "Mr. Anderson," she said, her voice calm and steady. "How can I help you today?" Jack took a deep breath, knowing that this was it, the moment he had been waiting for. "Maria," he began, his voice a little softer than he intended. "I've been thinking about everything. About what I said to you. About the way I've been living my life. And I want to make it right." Maria didn't say anything right away. She simply waited, her eyes studying him, as if measuring the sincerity of his words. Jack continued, his voice steady now. "I've spent my entire life focusing on business deals, making money, gaining power. But I've come to realize that those things don't matter if I don't have something more. If I don't have integrity, respect, and the ability to connect with people." Maria still didn't say anything, but Jack could tell that she was listening, really listening. "I want to change," he said, his words hanging in the air between them. "But I know that I can't do it alone. I need your help." Maria raised an eyebrow slightly, her expression still neutral. "You want my help?" she asked, her tone thoughtful. "Why?" Jack was taken aback by her question. It wasn't a rejection, but it wasn't exactly an acceptance either. "Because you've already helped me," he said quietly. "You've shown me what it means to be more than just a businessman. You've shown me what it means to be a real person, someone who values others and doesn't just use them as tools to get ahead. I need that in my life. I need to be that person." Maria was silent for a moment, as if considering his words. Jack could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on him. Finally, she spoke. "All right," she said simply, her voice still calm, but with a hint of something warmer in it. "But you need to understand something, Jack. Change isn't easy. It's not just about saying the right words or making promises. It's about doing the work. And it's about sticking with it, even when it gets tough." Jack nodded, his heart lifting. He wasn't expecting an easy answer, but this was exactly what he needed to hear. "I understand," he said firmly. "And I'm ready to do the work. I won't give up." Maria looked at him for a long moment before nodding. "Good," she said. "Then let's see what you're made of." Jack left the restaurant that afternoon with a sense of purpose that he had never known before. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. It wasn't going to be easy, but he was ready. He was ready to prove himself, not just to Maria, but to himself. He was ready to become the man he had always wanted to be. And with Maria's help, he knew he could do it. I spent the next few weeks immersed in the work of change. The world around Jack Anderson seemed to carry on as usual, the bustling pace of his company moving with its usual efficiency. But Jack, now more than ever, felt like an outsider in his own life. Every day he tried to embrace the lessons Maria had imparted to him. The simple yet powerful truths she had shown him were constantly on his mind. Change was not a matter of words, but of actions. And actions, as he had quickly learned, required persistence, humility, and most of all, time. At work, Jack found himself stepping back more, allowing his team to take the lead while he observed. He could feel the growing distance between his former self and the man he was trying to become. For the first time, he wasn't leading every meeting with the same iron grip. He was listening, really listening, to those around him. He wasn't in control, and that feeling, although uncomfortable at first, began to feel liberating. But as much as he was changing, Jack knew there was still much more to do. His transformation didn't just involve the way he led his company. It also involved how he treated others, especially people like Maria, who had become the catalyst for his self-reflection. She had challenged him, and now it was his turn to rise to the challenge. One late afternoon, Jack found himself in his office, staring out over the skyline once more. His phone buzzed, pulling him back to reality. It was a message from Maria, asterisk, "There's something important I want to discuss. Can you meet me tomorrow after your meetings?" Asterisk. The message was simple, but the word stuck with him. He had been waiting for this moment, though he didn't know exactly what to expect. The last time they spoke, things had been tense, but he had also felt a flicker of understanding between them. Jack knew that meeting Maria had altered the course of his life. There was no turning back from the person he was becoming. The next day, after a long series of meetings, Jack found himself walking back to the restaurant once more. This time, however, he didn't feel the same uncertainty he had before. He wasn't walking in as the CEO with all the answers. He was walking in as someone who had a lot to learn, someone who was ready to accept the challenges ahead. As he stepped through the door of the restaurant, Maria was there, just as he had expected. She wasn't behind the counter this time. She was sitting at a table, waiting for him. Her eyes met his the moment he entered, and for a second, he saw something different in them. No longer was there the guarded indifference that had been present when they first met. There was something else now. Maybe it was trust. Jack walked over to the table and took a seat across from her. For a moment, they just sat there in silence. Jack could feel the weight of the conversation that was about to unfold, but he didn't rush it. He waited. Finally, Maria spoke. "You've been working hard, Jack," she said, her voice steady but gentle. "I can see the change in you. But there's one thing I need to ask." Jack nodded, leaning forward slightly. "What's that? Do you really think you're ready for what comes next?" Maria's question hung in the air. Jack had been thinking about it for weeks, but hearing her ask it directly made the truth sink in. He had been trying, yes, but change wasn't something that could happen overnight. He couldn't just will it into being. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice quieter than usual. "But I'm trying. I know that it's not enough to just say it. I have to prove it." Maria studied him for a long moment, her gaze unwavering. Jack had expected her to be skeptical, but instead, he saw something else in her eyes, something like understanding. "Change takes time," she said softly. "But the real test is whether you're willing to keep going, even when it's hard. Are you ready for that?" Jack didn't hesitate. "Yes," he said firmly. "I've never been more ready." Maria nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Good," she said simply. "Because it's not just about you, Jack. It's about how you treat the people around you, how you lift them up, not just use them to get ahead." Her words struck him deeply. For so long, Jack had viewed people as tools, as means to an end. But Maria had shown him that they were more than that. They were people, with their own dreams, their own struggles, and their own worth. It wasn't enough to just be a successful businessman. He had to be a better man, a better person. As they sat there, the conversation turning to lighter topics, Jack felt a shift inside him. It wasn't a dramatic change, but it was a start. Maria was right. Change wasn't about grand gestures. It was about the little moments, the quiet decisions to do better, to be better. Jack left the restaurant that evening with a sense of peace he hadn't known before. The road ahead would still be difficult, but for the first time, he felt like he was on the right path. He wasn't trying to be perfect, but he was trying to be real. And that, he realized, was the most important thing of all. I woke up early the next morning with a quiet confidence I hadn't felt in years. Jack Anderson was beginning to embrace the change he had promised, not only to Maria, but to himself. For weeks, he had been testing his new approach, taking steps back at the office, listening more than speaking, and trying to show respect to everyone around him, no matter their role. It wasn't easy, but he was determined. What had once been an instinctual need for control was now a conscious effort to let go, to allow others to lead. His thoughts drifted back to the meeting with Maria, the conversation that had shifted everything. It had become clear to Jack that the change wasn't just about being different. It was about sustaining that difference, not just in moments of introspection, but in the everyday decisions that defined a person. He spent the morning working through emails, attending video calls, and completing tasks, but there was a constant undercurrent in his mind. He needed to see Maria again. He had told her that he was ready to change, but he wasn't sure she believed him completely. He had made a promise, and he intended to keep it, but he needed to prove it, not just with words, but with actions. By lunchtime, Jack decided he was going to take the afternoon off to find her. He left his office without a second thought, ignoring the usual responsibilities that demanded his attention. He had bigger things to focus on now. When he arrived at the restaurant, the familiar scent of coffee and freshly baked bread filled the air. The small, intimate atmosphere of the place hadn't changed, and for a moment, Jack felt a sense of peace. He spotted Maria almost immediately, moving with her usual grace, carrying a tray to a table at the far end of the room. She looked up and saw him approaching, her face neutral but expectant. "Mr. Anderson," she said, her voice steady but not unfriendly. "What brings you here today?" Jack paused for a moment, choosing his words carefully. This wasn't about business. It wasn't about making an offer or trying to impress her. This was about being honest and showing her that he had truly changed. "Maria," he began, his voice soft but firm, "I wanted to thank you." She tilted her head slightly, a silent invitation for him to continue. "You've been right about everything," Jack said, "about the change I need to make. I've spent so much of my life focusing on what I could take, on how I could control everything around me. But you showed me that there's more to life than that. There's respect, there's integrity, and there's humility." Maria didn't interrupt, but Jack could feel her watching him closely, as if trying to determine the sincerity of his words. "I know I can't undo everything I've done," he continued, "but I want to be a better person, not just for you, but for myself." He paused, looking her in the eyes. "I'm not here to ask for anything. I just want you to know that I'm committed to doing the work, to sticking with it, even when it gets hard." Maria was silent for a moment, her expression unreadable. Jack held his breath, unsure of what she was thinking. Finally, she spoke. "Change isn't a one-time thing, Jack," she said softly. "It's not about making promises when things are easy. It's about following through when it gets difficult. And I've seen a lot of people make those promises, only to give up when they don't get the results they want right away." Jack nodded, fully aware of what she was saying. He had been one of those people. "I understand," he said, "and I'm ready to prove that I'm different. I won't give up, no matter how hard it gets." Maria looked at him for a long time, her gaze piercing, as if searching for any hint of insincerity. Finally, she nodded slowly. "All right, Jack," she said quietly. "I believe you." Jack felt a weight lift off his shoulders, but he knew that this was just the beginning. He had made the first step, but the real work was still ahead of him. Maria had agreed to help him, but she had also made it clear that the road to change wouldn't be easy. It would take time, persistence, and a willingness to face the uncomfortable truths about himself. As they continued to talk, Jack realized that this wasn't just about trying to win Maria's respect. It was about earning it, and earning the respect of everyone he had wronged over the years. It was about showing that he was capable of more than just being a wealthy businessman. He could be someone people looked up to, someone who made a positive impact on the world around him. After their conversation, Jack left the restaurant feeling lighter, but also more determined. He knew there would be setbacks, times when he would fall back into old habits. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he had the tools to overcome those moments and keep moving forward. As he walked back to his office, his thoughts were clear. He wasn't going to rush through this process. He wasn't going to pretend that change was instantaneous. But he was ready to put in the work. And with Maria's help, he knew he could become the man he had always wanted to be. I walked into the office the next morning with a renewed sense of purpose, ready to put everything into practice. The past few weeks had been a journey of transformation, and while the progress had been slow, I could already feel the difference within myself. The man I had been was still there, lurking beneath the surface, but now I was actively choosing a different path. I had told Maria that I was committed to changing, and I was going to prove it, not just to her, but to everyone around me. I wasn't going to allow myself to slip back into old habits. My assistant, Sarah, greeted me as I walked through the door. She had been with me for years, and though we had always had a professional relationship, there was a certain tension between us now. She had witnessed the shift in my attitude, and I could tell she was still trying to figure out if it was real or just another phase. "Good morning, Mr. Anderson," she said with a polite smile, but her eyes were searching, as if waiting for some sign that I was truly different. "Morning, Sarah," I replied, offering a small smile of my own. It felt strange to be so open, so transparent with her. For so long, I had kept my emotions buried, thinking they were a sign of weakness. But now, I realized that being vulnerable was actually a strength. "Can you cancel my afternoon meetings?" I asked. "I have something I need to take care of." Sarah raised an eyebrow, but nodded. "Of course. Do you need anything else?" I paused for a moment, considering. "I'd like to spend the rest of the morning with the team. No more micromanaging. Let them take the lead." I could see the surprise in her eyes. She wasn't used to hearing me speak like this, but I had meant every word. It wasn't just about delegating work. It was about trusting the people around me, something I had struggled with for years. "Understood," she said, though there was a hint of uncertainty in her voice. I smiled, feeling a small sense of relief. The first step was always the hardest, but I had just taken it. The day went on, and I found myself engaging with the team in ways I never had before. I listened to their ideas, encouraged their input, and resisted the urge to take control. It was difficult, but as the day wore on, I began to feel a sense of accomplishment. For the first time, I felt like I was working alongside my team, not just dictating their every move. Around lunchtime, I decided it was time to visit the restaurant again. I knew it might seem like I was chasing Maria, but it wasn't about her. It was about proving to myself that I could follow through on my commitment to change. I wanted to show her that I wasn't just saying the right things. I was doing them. As I entered the familiar restaurant, I was met with the comforting scent of freshly brewed coffee and warm bread. The atmosphere was the same as always, cozy and inviting. And there, standing behind the counter, was Maria. She didn't see me at first, but I could tell she knew I was there. It had been weeks since our last conversation, but I could still feel the weight of it. I wasn't sure what she expected of me, but I knew I wasn't the same man who had walked into her life months ago. When she finally looked up and saw me, there was no judgment in her eyes, no skepticism, just quiet expectation. "Jack," she said, her voice steady. "Back again." I smiled, trying to mask the nervousness I felt. "I wanted to check in," I said simply. "How have you been?" Maria studied me for a moment before answering. "I'm fine," she replied, her voice still calm. "But I see something's different." "What are you doing here, Jack?" Her question was simple, but it cut straight to the heart of the matter. I could feel the weight of her gaze, challenging me to prove that I wasn't just talking about change. I had to show her. "I'm here because I meant what I said," I said, my voice firm. "I'm committed to being better, and I wanted to show you that I'm taking it seriously." Maria didn't speak immediately. She looked at me, as though weighing my words, and for a moment, I felt the familiar tension of doubt creeping in. But then, after what felt like an eternity, she nodded. "All right," she said quietly. "But words don't mean anything unless you back them up. I'm watching, Jack. Not just today, but every day. Let's see if you really can change." Her words were a challenge, but they weren't harsh. They were a reminder that real change wasn't a one-time thing. It was a continuous effort, and I had to stay true to it. I nodded, feeling a rush of determination. "I won't let you down," I said firmly. "I promise." We sat there for a few more minutes, talking about life, about work, about the things that mattered. It was a simple conversation, but it felt like a turning point. I had come to the restaurant that day to prove something to Maria, but I realized I was proving something to myself. I was committed to change, not because of her, but because I knew it was what I needed. I stood up to leave, feeling lighter than I had in months. As I walked out of the restaurant, the weight on my shoulders seemed a little less heavy. I wasn't done yet, and the road ahead would still be difficult. But for the first time, I felt like I was on the right path. I entered the office the next day with a sense of quiet determination, carrying with me the lessons from the last few weeks. Jack Anderson had spent most of his career chasing power, wealth, and control, but he had come to realize that these things, while important, were not enough to sustain a meaningful life. The transformation he had promised Maria and himself wasn't just a temporary phase. It was a complete shift in how he would live, work, and treat the people around him. He had promised Maria that he would prove himself, and so far, he had kept that promise. But change was a continuous process, and Jack knew that he needed to stay vigilant. As he sat at his desk, reviewing documents, his thoughts kept returning to Maria. Her words echoed in his mind. Words don't mean anything unless you back them up. She had been right. He could talk all he wanted about change, but if his actions didn't reflect his intentions, it would all be for nothing. The phone buzzed, snapping Jack out of his thoughts. It was an email from his assistant, Sarah, reminding him of an important meeting later in the afternoon. But today, Jack wasn't focused on the meeting. Today, he was focused on the work he had to do within himself. He closed his laptop and stood up. It was time to visit Maria again. He didn't know exactly what he was going to say, but he knew he needed to check in with her. He needed to show her that he was serious about what he had promised. The walk to the restaurant was short, but as Jack approached, he felt a familiar mix of nerves and anticipation. When he walked through the door, the soft hum of conversation and the aroma of fresh coffee greeted him. It was a comforting environment, a place where people didn't care about titles or status. It was a place where he could just be. He scanned the room, and there she was, sitting behind the counter, just like the first time he had met her. But this time, something was different. Maria was no longer just the waitress. She had become something more. She had become the person who had made him question everything he thought he knew about success and power. He walked up to the counter, and she looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "Jack," she said, nodding as if she had been expecting him. "What's on your mind today?" Jack felt a slight rush of relief. There was no judgment in her voice, no expectation, just an open invitation to speak. He took a deep breath. "Maria, I've been thinking a lot about what you said to me the other day, about how words don't mean anything unless they're backed up by action. I want you to know that I've been working on that." Maria didn't respond immediately. She simply watched him, waiting. Jack could feel her gaze, steady and calm, urging him to continue. "I've spent my whole life focusing on the wrong things. Power, money, status. I thought those were the things that defined me. But now I see that there's so much more to life. It's about how you treat people. It's about respect. It's about being the kind of person who can make a difference, not just in business, but in the lives of those around you." Maria nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving his. "That's a good start, Jack," she said quietly. "But change isn't something you just talk about. It's something you live, day in and day out. Are you ready to live that way?" Jack didn't hesitate. "Yes, I am. I'm ready to prove it. Not just to you, but to everyone around me." Maria seemed to study him for a moment longer, as though measuring the sincerity of his words. Then, with a small smile, she nodded. "All right," she said. "Let's see what you can do." The weight of her words settled over Jack as he stood there, feeling both relieved and humbled. It wasn't going to be easy, but it felt like he had finally found the direction he needed to go. As they continued to talk, Jack realized how far he had come. He wasn't the same person who had walked into this restaurant months ago. He had learned to listen, to be more open, to value people for who they were, not just what they could do for him. As the conversation turned to lighter topics, Jack felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. He wasn't perfect, and he knew there would be setbacks. But he was on the right path. He wasn't doing this for anyone else but himself. Maria had given him the tools to change, but it was up to him to put them into practice. As Jack left the restaurant that day, he knew that the journey wasn't over. It had just begun. But for the first time, he felt confident that he was heading in the right direction. The road ahead would be difficult, but he was ready to face it. He had made a promise to himself, and this time, he was going to keep it. "I woke up the next morning with the same quiet sense of determination, but today, there was something more. It was the feeling of having crossed a threshold. Jack Anderson had begun his transformation months ago, but today, it felt different. It was no longer about making promises. It was about living up to them. He had taken the first few steps, and while there had been moments of doubt, the last few weeks had shown him that change, real change, was possible. The question now was whether he could keep moving forward. He had promised Maria that he was ready, and now it was time to prove it, both to her and to himself. He spent the morning in his office, but today was different. He wasn't focused on deals or acquisitions. For the first time in a long time, he was focused on his team, on the people around him. He found himself listening more closely in meetings, stepping back and allowing others to take the lead. He wasn't just a bystander in his company anymore. He was part of the team. The realization was both liberating and humbling. He had been so used to being the one in control, the one who made the decisions, the one who commanded the room. But now, he was learning to trust others, to allow them the space to lead. It wasn't always easy. There were times when his old instincts kicked in, when he wanted to take over, to assert his authority. But each time, he paused and reminded himself that this was part of the process. This was what growth looked like. That afternoon, Jack received a call from Sarah, his assistant. She told him that there was a meeting scheduled with a group of investors in the next few hours, a major deal that could take his company to new heights. It was exactly the kind of deal Jack used to be obsessed with, big, flashy, and full of potential rewards. But today, something was different. As he prepared for the meeting, his mind kept drifting. Back to Maria. He had seen her only a few days ago, and their conversation had left a lasting impression on him. She had challenged him in ways he hadn't expected, and now, it felt like the real challenge was not just about business, but about his own growth. When Jack entered the conference room, the familiar faces of investors greeted him. But this time, he didn't feel the same rush of power he once had. Instead, he took a seat at the table, listened to their pitch, and allowed himself to hear what they had to say without immediately thinking about how he could dominate the conversation. As the meeting went on, Jack realized that his approach was working. He wasn't trying to control the flow of the discussion, and it felt surprisingly right. He was asking questions, listening to their responses, and considering their input with genuine interest. He could tell the investors were responding to this shift. They were more engaged, more willing to open up, and for the first time, Jack felt like he was building a partnership rather than just closing a deal. The meeting ended with the investors leaving, nodding in agreement to the proposal Jack had suggested. But it wasn't the deal that left Jack feeling satisfied. It was the way the meeting had gone. He had shown them a side of himself that he hadn't let anyone see in years, a side that was open, thoughtful, and willing to collaborate. For the first time, he felt like he was moving forward not just in business, but in life. That evening, Jack found himself walking to the restaurant again. He didn't have a specific reason, but he felt the pull to see Maria, to check in with her again. As he walked through the door, the familiar sound of clinking dishes and soft conversation filled the air. Maria was behind the counter again, serving a couple near the window. She looked up when she saw him, but this time, there was no immediate reaction. It was as if she had been expecting him. "Jack," she said, her voice warm but measured. "Back again." He smiled, a little nervous but more sure of himself than he had been before. "I wanted to check in," he said, his voice steady. "And I wanted to thank you for helping me realize what really matters." Maria raised an eyebrow but didn't interrupt. She was listening. "I've spent so many years chasing the wrong things, Maria," Jack continued, his voice softer now. "Money, power, control. But those things don't mean anything if you don't have integrity, if you don't have respect for the people around you. I've learned that. I've been learning that." Maria studied him for a long moment before speaking. "And what are you going to do about it?" she asked, her voice calm but still challenging. Jack took a deep breath. "I'm going to keep doing the work," he said firmly. "I know it's not going to be easy. There are days when it's going to feel like I'm slipping back into my old ways. But I won't let that stop me. I'm committed to changing. I'm committed to being better." Maria nodded slowly, as if she could see the sincerity in his eyes. "That's all anyone can do," she said quietly. "Keep working at it. Change doesn't happen overnight, Jack. But if you're truly committed, then I believe you can do it." Jack smiled, a sense of peace settling over him. He wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. He wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone anymore. He was just trying to be a better version of himself. And with Maria's quiet guidance, he knew he could do it. I woke up the next morning feeling a quiet sense of pride. Jack Anderson had come a long way in a short time, and it was all thanks to the lessons he had learned, some hard, some unexpected, from Maria. It wasn't just about business anymore. It wasn't about deals or numbers or acquisitions. It was about becoming someone who could look at himself in the mirror and feel like he was doing the right thing. He had spent most of his life driven by the need to be in control, but now he was learning to let go of that need. He was still the same Jack Anderson, ambitious, driven, and determined, but there was a shift inside him. Something different. Something better. The last few weeks had shown him that he could change. But the truth was, change wasn't a one-time thing. It was something that had to be worked on every day. And Jack knew that. He had no illusion that this was going to be easy. There would be moments when the old habits crept back in, when the temptation to take control, to dominate, would be too strong to resist. But he also knew that those moments didn't define him. What mattered was what he did after that. What mattered was the next step. That afternoon, Jack found himself at his desk, trying to focus on work. He had a big presentation coming up, a deal that could take the company to new heights. It was exactly the kind of deal he used to be obsessed with. But today, it didn't feel the same. Jack had come to realize that it wasn't the deal itself that mattered. It was the way he approached it. If he could approach this deal with integrity, with respect for the people involved, then he would know he was on the right track. The presentation was scheduled for the next day, and as Jack prepared, his thoughts kept drifting back to Maria. He hadn't seen her since their last conversation, but he knew she was out there, quietly making her own impact on the world. She wasn't chasing power or wealth. She was doing something far more important. She was living with purpose. That evening, after wrapping up work, Jack found himself walking to the restaurant again. He didn't know what he was going to say to Maria, but he felt the need to check in, to show her that he was still committed to the journey they had started together. As he walked through the door, the familiar sounds of the restaurant greeted him. The soft murmur of conversation, the clink of dishes, and the smell of fresh food all felt comforting. There she was, standing behind the counter, just as she had been the first time Jack had walked in. But something was different now. Maria didn't seem like the same person either. She had always been confident, but now there was a quiet strength in her, a sense of calm that was contagious. She looked up and saw him, her expression neutral but welcoming. "Jack," she said, her voice calm and steady. "Back again." Jack smiled, a little nervous but more certain than he had been in the past. "I wanted to check in," he said, his voice steady. "How's everything going?" Maria nodded slowly, her eyes studying him. "It's going well," she said. "And you? How are things with you?" Jack hesitated for a moment. "They're going well. I've been working on it. I'm trying to keep the promises I made, to myself and to you." Maria raised an eyebrow, but she didn't interrupt. "And how's that going?" she asked, her voice thoughtful. Jack looked down at his hands for a moment, considering her question. "It's not always easy," he admitted. "There are days when I feel like I'm slipping back into my old ways, but I'm catching myself more. I'm more aware now. And that's progress." Maria nodded slowly, as if considering his words. "That's good," she said quietly. "Progress isn't about perfection. It's about consistency. Are you being consistent, Jack?" Jack paused, letting the question sink in. "I think so," he said slowly. "I'm not perfect, but I'm trying every day. I'm taking responsibility for my actions, and I'm trying to be more present for the people around me. I'm trying to listen, to show respect, to be a better person." Maria studied him for a long moment, her gaze steady and unwavering. "That's all anyone can do," she said softly. "But you're right. It's not about being perfect. It's about being aware and taking responsibility." Jack felt a sense of relief wash over him. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right track. He wasn't perfect, and he wasn't going to be tomorrow, but he was committed. And that was enough. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for helping me see all of this. I'm not sure I would have gotten here without your guidance." Maria smiled, a small, knowing smile. "You would have gotten here eventually, Jack. You just needed a little push." Jack nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for everything she had shown him. "I'm grateful for that push," he said, his voice steady. "And I won't forget it." As he stood to leave, Maria gave him one last look. "Just remember," she said, her voice soft but firm. "It's not about the destination. It's about the journey. Keep going." Jack smiled, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was heading in the right direction, not just in his career, but in his life. He wasn't just chasing success anymore. He was chasing something more meaningful. He was chasing growth, connection, and integrity. And with Maria's guidance, he knew he could get there. I walked into the office the next morning, feeling the weight of what I had committed to over the past few weeks. Jack Anderson was no longer just a businessman chasing deals. He was a man trying to build something real. Something grounded in integrity, respect, and connection. The morning meetings had been draining, as they usually were, but today, they felt different. I wasn't just watching my team perform tasks. I was actively listening, giving them space to speak, and it felt natural. The power I had clung to for so many years seemed like a distant memory. My focus was on collaboration, on lifting those around me. It was a huge shift. I hadn't fully realized it until I saw Sarah's reaction. She had worked with me for years, seen my highs and lows, and today, when she gave me a look, I could see that she was puzzled, but not in the way she used to be. She was watching me, seeing this new version of myself, but it wasn't judgment. It was curiosity. I had changed, and that was something she hadn't expected. During lunch, I walked out of the office with a sense of quiet certainty. I wasn't rushing to meet clients or finalizing contracts. I was heading to the one place I had avoided for a while, but now I knew I had to go back to. It was time to see Maria again. As I entered the restaurant, the familiar sounds and smells enveloped me. I hadn't realized how much I missed this place, how much it had grounded me in ways my corporate world never had. And there she was, behind the counter, effortlessly serving a group of regulars. Her calm, quiet confidence was something I had come to admire, and today, more than ever, I knew I had so much to learn from her. Maria looked up as I approached, and for a second, she studied me, her eyes sharp but open. "Back again?" she asked, but this time, there was no challenge in her voice. There was something softer, more inviting. "I've been thinking," I said, taking a seat in front of her. "And I realized something. I'm not where I want to be, and I never will be unless I keep working at it. It's not about the business deals anymore." Maria nodded, quietly waiting for me to continue. "It's about doing the right thing, about being the kind of man who can lead with respect, not just power. And I want you to know that I'm still committed to that path. I'm still learning." Her eyes never left mine as she listened. She was quiet for a moment, considering my words. "I'm glad to hear that," she said, her voice steady. "But words are just words, Jack. It's your actions that speak louder." I nodded, feeling the weight of her statement. It wasn't the first time she had told me that, and it wasn't the first time I realized how much truth was in those words. "I know," I said quietly. "And that's why I'm here today. I'm still working on it. But I know I can't do it alone. I need to prove it to myself, to the people I work with, and to you." Maria took a deep breath before answering. "Proving it isn't about grand gestures," she said softly. "It's in the small things, the little moments where you choose the right path over the easy one. It's not about what you say, Jack. It's about showing up, every day, and doing the work. No shortcuts." I let her words sink in. She was right, as usual. It was easy to say I was changing, but it would take time and effort to show that I was truly committed. I wasn't going to change overnight, and I couldn't expect that from myself. But I was ready to try. "I understand," I said, feeling the truth of it settle into my chest. "I won't stop working at it, Maria. I promise." She smiled, a small, knowing smile that seemed to hold more than just acknowledgement. It was approval, but also an understanding that the real work was just beginning. "That's all I need to hear," she said, and for the first time, I felt like I was moving in the right direction. I had made mistakes, but I was owning them. I had let the world tell me who I should be, but now, I was telling myself who I wanted to be. The rest of the day passed in a quiet, focused haze. I spent the afternoon with my team, giving them the space to lead while I supported them from behind. I asked questions, listened carefully, and offered suggestions without taking over. I knew that the key to real leadership wasn't about control. It was about trust, trusting others to step up, trusting myself to lead with integrity, and trusting that the small choices I made every day would add up to something meaningful. That evening, as I left the office, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of peace. It wasn't perfection, but it was progress. It wasn't the end of the journey, but it was a significant step forward. And with that thought in mind, I made my way home, knowing that every day was a new opportunity to prove that I was capable of change. I stood in front of the mirror the next morning, taking in the reflection staring back at me. Jack Anderson was no longer the same man who had walked into Maria's life months ago. He had changed. It wasn't just about how he acted at work or how he handled business deals. It was about the choices he made every single day. He had worked hard, really hard, to get to this point, and while he knew that the journey wasn't over, he also knew that this was who he was now. He had taken responsibility for his actions, for the way he had lived in the past, and he was committed to being a better person. He didn't need validation from anyone else to know that. He had already proved it to himself. The change wasn't going to be something he could check off a list. It wasn't something that could be completed and then forgotten. It was a part of him now, a part of every decision he made, every conversation he had, and every relationship he built. As he walked to the office, he could feel the weight of everything he had learned from Maria, the importance of humility, respect, and integrity. These weren't just lessons he had learned in passing. These were lessons that had transformed him, that had reshaped who he was at his core. And as he sat at his desk, ready to face another day of work, he felt a quiet peace settle over him. He had learned that success wasn't about taking control. It wasn't about bending people to his will. It was about working together, lifting others up, and building something that could stand the test of time. The phone rang, and Jack answered, his voice calm, steady, and filled with a newfound sense of purpose. It was Sarah, his assistant. She had news about a potential partnership, a business opportunity that could propel the company even further. But as Jack listened, he felt something else, something he hadn't felt in the past. He didn't feel the rush, the excitement that came with chasing every opportunity. Instead, he felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that he had learned to balance ambition with authenticity. The partnership was important, yes, but not at the expense of his values. That was the shift. He didn't need to sacrifice his integrity to make a deal work. And when the meeting finally came, Jack approached it with a new mindset. He listened more than he spoke. He asked the right questions. And when the deal was done, it wasn't about the monetary gain or the recognition. It was about the relationships they had built along the way. He had proven to himself that he could build something based on trust, not just power. As he walked out of the meeting room, Jack felt like he had accomplished something greater than any business deal. He had built a foundation that was grounded in respect, something that could not be taken away. Later that day, he found himself back at the restaurant. It had become a place of reflection, a place where he had begun his journey of change. Maria was there, just as she had been before, but this time, there was no tension, no uncertainty between them. He walked up to the counter, and she looked up at him, her expression calm but welcoming. "Jack," she said, with that same quiet strength that had changed everything for him. "How's it going?" Jack smiled, his confidence steady but not arrogant. "It's going well," he said. "I'm finally where I need to be." Maria's eyes softened. "I'm glad to hear that," she said. "But remember, Jack, it's not about being perfect. It's about being better every day. And from what I've seen, you're on the right track." Jack felt a sense of peace settle over him. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For everything." Maria nodded. "I didn't do anything, Jack. You did the work. You're the one who made the choice to change." Jack stood there for a moment, feeling a deep gratitude for the journey that had brought him to this point. He had learned that change wasn't just about what he could accomplish. It was about who he could become. And as he left the restaurant that evening, he realized that he had come full circle. He had taken the steps to become a better person, and now, it was up to him to keep moving forward. The road ahead would be filled with challenges, but Jack knew that as long as he stayed true to the lessons he had learned, he would continue to grow. He wasn't perfect, and he didn't expect to be. But for the first time, he felt like he was on the right path, the path to becoming the person he had always wanted to be.